Welcome to Taste Buds. I'm Debra Eckerling, goal strategist, writer, and foodie. And today I'm speaking with food writer Amy Rogers. Welcome, Amy.
Hi, Deb.
And you are a food writer and food lover and cooking lover as well. We'll get into all of that. But where did you get in food writing?
Well, it all starts with food appreciation. I came from a family of, immigrants like we all did, who had strong food traditions that they didn't always have times of plenty. So I remember from the earliest age gathering around the table at my mother and father's home with our grandparents there and cooking, whether it was a holiday meal or whether it was just a bagels and lox brunch on a weekend. Those are my earliest memories of gathering around food. So when I became, in later years, a writer, it was kind of inevitable that those two things would meet.
I love that. Well, I am a reformed non-cook, and I love telling people I went from dialing for dinner to being a food writer and food podcaster. Like you, I grew up with that love and appreciation of the food, but there's something, I think, a switch in you when you begin to love the process of cooking that you just can't come back from.
And I think some people really are attuned to that, and other people just maybe are not. And for me, the kind of light bulb moment was, I'd been working as a journalist for a pretty long time. And one day I sat down and I noticed that food kept showing up in my stories. For example, I was writing about what it's like to raise a family on minimum wage. And the biggest challenge for the family I was profiling was having enough good, healthy, appealing food that would manage to cover what everyone needed in the family. And then other times, I would just start to write an assignment that had nothing to do with food. For example, I was profiling some folks who had moved to the US from Serbia in search of medical care for their children, and they ended up opening a bakery. So I kind of sat back and I said, hmm, what would happen if I kind of just looked at that head on and started approaching it directly? And that's where the food writer label kind of started to stick.
That's fantastic. And I love how and this is something in my goal strategy. I always say the thing that you love, the thing that you talk about the most, you need to pay attention to that because if that's where you're putting your energy, people are going to feel that for sure.
Right. And I will always tell people that I'm not a chef and I'm not a fancy cook. I'm just someone who appreciates good food. So I think, people are always very, very scared of cooking for the food lady. I'm like, no, I'm just a regular person. You could just make me a chicken or a sandwich or something like that. I'm not, it's not a restaurant thing. It's a food and identity and story thing.
I'm with you. I've got my favorites. We all do. And it's always fun to perk things up a little bit. So what is your favorite food or cooking?
Well, I always say that my favorite recipe is anything someone else makes for me. Uh, I am a passionate food appreciator. But, at the end of the day, it all comes down to the simple thing. Um, I enjoy, a fancy meal as much as anybody else, but I still have, the most heartfelt memories and the most satisfying food experiences around the things like the roast chicken and the noodle kugel and the things like that I grew up with. So I can still make a matzo ball today that I'd challenge pretty much anybody up against because I watched my mother and my grandmothers do it so many times. And there were no secrets to it. It was just about being patient, chilling the dough, and making sure that all of your matzo balls are the same size.
Is that the secret? The
That
same
is the
size? Why
secret.
why does that make a difference? Now I'm curious.
Because if they're not all the same size, when they start to puff up, some of them will cook faster than others. And you may have found this out, which I found out the hard way. If you cook them too long, they'll fall apart. If you cook them not long enough, they'll be soft on the outside, but they'll be raw on the inside. So the trick is to chill the dough. Some people put club soda. I don't do that. but just fill the dough. And as soon as you can roll those little matzo balls into the little walnut size, put them right in the boiling water and try to get them all in as close to each other at the same time as you can so they all cook at the same rate.
I feel like challenge accepted because they are never all the same size when I make them, and now that all makes sense. I mean,
That's true.
but a fall apart matzo ball is still delicious, and let's be honest.
We turn down no matzo balls. No.
No matzo ball left behind. What is this secret food that you discovered makes everything better?
Well, it was a pandemic panic moment because early on in the pandemic, when we weren't shopping and we were just trying to do what we could with what we had on hand, I discovered that bagel seasoning makes pretty much everything better. Maybe not strawberry cheesecake, but pretty much everything else. Because if you think about it, so much of Jewish cooking, whether it's European based or Middle Eastern based or even just American based, has in it garlic, onion, salt, pepper, you know, and sometimes a little sesame seeds. And I have started just kind of making my own, dumping extra sesame seeds and extra poppy seeds. And it's terrific on a bagel, of course, because that's what we know. But then if you don't have a bagel, you can put it on your toast with butter. And then I said, okay, what would happen if I put it in pasta? Well, I'm here to tell you it's pretty darn good. And then I used it as a rub on some chicken and put a little paprika and bagel seasoning. It became such a thing. You can mix it with oil and vinegar and have a salad dressing. And it just has all the flavor profiles that you need in pretty much anything savory. I have thrown it in pasta salads. I've put it on green beans. It's just my favorite one size fits all flavoring.
Now I feel like you need to come up with something like unique that no one would ever think of putting it on, like ice cream. What
Well, the minute I said cheesecake, I challenged myself and said, "Maybe we can make a savory tomato cheesecake with everything bagel seasoning." And I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay, let me know how that goes. And I have to, since you mentioned bagel, what is your perfect bagel?
Well, um, I live now in the deep South where we try, but we don't have New York bagel. We don't even have Michigan bagel, which are the two northern places where I grew up. Um, I'm not one of these heretics who scoops out the bagel. And if you are, okay. But to me, that kind of defeats the purpose. I get a good bagel so rarely that I'm just going to devour every bit of it. I love the everything bagel, but my true heart of my heart is the sesame bagel. And I like the savories. I'm not a fan of the sweet things. I don't like the strawberry cheesecake. I don't like the bananas and all of that stuff. I like smoked salmon, scallions, sesame seeds. Pretty old school.
In Did you say cream cheese or no?
If I didn't, I meant to.
I have noticed in doing the show that, like we all have an opinion on food, we definitely all have an opinion on bagels and what we love.
Yes.
Absolutely. I want to go back to the food writing a little bit because it always kind of, uh, I love it because for me, it's a way to express, to just like people like you who love living in that land of food. What advice do you have for people who want to do more or do food writing?
Well, the good thing about living in the land of food is that everybody can live here. I teach a workshop that I've most recently taught at our public library, a general interest workshop called How to Write a Recipe. And it sounds simple, but it can be as complicated as you want it to be. Most people have at some point in their family legacy a person who wrote down recipes or made the best pie or made the best something, even if they didn't write it down. So there's already a process of handing down stories from generation to generation within our families and within our faith communities and within our ethnic communities. So that's a great place to start with food writing is my favorite food growing up was, or I remember my family making this. And those kinds of little snapshot recollections become very, very meaningful because those you can then hand down to future generations and preserve your cultural legacy. You don't have to go out there and, taste a bunch of fancy wine or learn about, restaurant food to really be engaged in writing about food from the angle of storytelling. That's a long
Love
answer, I know.
I no, I love that, and what I'm getting from it is you don't have to be a professional food writer to write food. It's something that you can have for yourself, for your family that is meaningful as well.
Right. Recipe collecting is not just people collecting lists of ingredients, it's stories about people who did things in meaningful ways over time. So if you look at those, what we call the community cookbooks, whether they're the neighborhood or the Hadassah or the, Sisterhood of the Temple, all of those cookbooks are communities of people coming together, sharing their stories of which foods are meaningful to them. And especially now in the realm of Jewish cookery, we have so many amazing and tremendous, not just cookbooks, but books with food lore in them by people like Joan Nathan. We can learn so much about the legacy of our culture and the way the things that we eat have changed over time from place to place.
You know I'm going to ask you this question. How do you write a recipe?
Well, there are a lot of different ways to write a recipe, so that's a whole topic. A recipe in its simplest form is a list of ingredients. But how do you then create the dish from the ingredients? There are narrative recipes where people will tell you a story. Grandma always got down the biggest cook pot when she made her matzo ball soup, and then the story unfolds. It's not just take 6 cups of water and a chicken. That may be a recipe, but that's not a food story. And I always recommend to anybody that wants to write about food to start talking to the folks they know, whether that's their elders or their neighbors or, people who have people whose lives have meaning to you. Find out what their legacy is, what their traditions are, and tell those stories. Of course, coming from the tragic history that so many of us have, it's all tangled up with a lot of difficulty and hardship. But those stories are as important to tell as the happy stories. And there are a lot of writers who are doing very important work around that as well.
And there are people like you, not just sharing your own stories, but bringing those very important stories to the forefront.
Oh, I'd much rather write about someone else than myself.
Is there something you know about food writing that you wish you knew when you started doing it?
Ooh, that's a good question. I might need a minute to think about that. Um, I have a saying that I often post when I kind of make things on social media where I say everything's a food story. And it really kind of is if you dig underneath pretty much any story of cultural survival or immigration or family legacy, there's a food component to it somewhere. So I kind of wish I had known earlier on to look for the food stories in the things I was writing about because it was many years in before I got the wake up call that the food stories were there all along.
Do you have a favorite?
Favorite?
Yeah, someone else. Do you have a favorite of someone else's story that you brought to the forefront?
A favorite story of someone that I've written about or with someone that I like to read?
Why not answer both questions? I
Okay.
was asking the first, but I'll take both.
Oh, I got to think about that first one. That's like asking someone to pick their favorite kid.
I'm
Um,
well aware.
yeah, I will say that my hands down absolute favorite food writer of all time is a writer named Lori Colwyn, who sadly died way too young a number of years ago. But she, for me, hit the sweet spot between food appreciation and the absolute ridiculousness of life. She wrote about things like trying to have a dinner party when you lived in a New York apartment, trying to cook for a picky kid. She has a whole thing on disastrous dinners and things that go wrong. And when I read her writing, I realized that food writing is something that's available to pretty much anyone that wants to dip their spoon into it. You don't have to be a scholar. It's nice if you are. And I have tremendous, endless admiration and respect for the folks who are doing the hard scholarly work. But for the rest of us who just want to get down our family or our community stories, anyone can give that a try. So Lori Colwin was the person that exposed me to that kind of very real, down to earth, everyday, observational, funny, wry ability to see life that way. Favorite people that I've written about. Well, let's see. I'll give you a short list. How's that? A kosher barbecue competition in Charlotte, North Carolina. A number of cities have kosher barbecue competitions. And they are, like I said, if you haven't seen a rabbi riding a mechanical bull, you haven't been to a barbecue competition. I love writing about those folks. I've written a bunch of times about different Jewish films and books and things like that. One of my favorite is, have you ever heard of or followed a comedy duo called Yid Life Crisis? Those guys are hysterical. And they did a film called Judaism about their hometown of Montreal and its Jewish culinary legacy. And I interviewed them when they came to visit the city where I was living, which was Charlotte, North Carolina, and kicked off the film. And they are the funniest thing, but they're super serious and super smart about food and culture and the ways that everything just intersects.
Which is pretty much the tagline for Taste Buds, bite-sized conversation about food, cooking, and community, because that it's the gist of everything, which is what you've been saying. And everything is a story, everything is a food story, and everybody has a different perspective from the way they love, appreciate, or approach food, which
Right.
is which is why it's so much fun, right? What do you think brings out the fun most in writing or living in that world of food?
It's a big tent. Everyone can come in. I'm working on a project now, a community cookbook project, where it's just folks sending their recipes in. I collected over 200 recipes a few years back and put them in this book called Hungry for Home, Stories of Food from Across the Carolinas from home cooks, where they said, we make our fried chicken in a paper bag. Like, okay, I've never done it that way. Good to know. People who said, you've got the whole issue of is it dressing or is it stuffing on Thanksgiving? You've got a lot of cultural discourse over it. So at its lightest and easiest, it's just a way for everyone to connect. And at its most thoughtful and thought-provoking, it's about our very identities as people.
I completely agree, and so well put. Thank you, Amy. Any final food for thought before we wrap up?
Um, y you know, I know a lot of people have worries and concerns about this and that, and my motto is kind of don't fear the food. Um, Food can be a joy. I hope everyone is able to find some joy and some pleasure and sustenance and satisfaction in food. And I really feel sad when I hear that there are folks who really treat it as the enemy. We need good food, and I'm always in favor of anything that helps tell that story and help people find meaning and enjoyment.
And food really is the best vehicle for that. Thank you so much, Amy Rogers. Where can people learn more about you and your writing and your love and appreciation of food?
Well, you can visit me online at amyrogers.net and you can see about some of the projects that I've done. You can pop me an email. There's a contact button there. And I look forward to hearing from folks who want to chat more about food and all the great things that we can share together.
Thank you, Amy. And thank you for tuning in to Taste Buds with Deb. Don't miss an episode. You can subscribe on YouTube, iTunes, and or your favorite podcast platform. And go to jewishjournal.com/podcast to get recipes and read the articles that go with each episode. And you can learn more at tastebudswithdeb.com. Enjoy, appreciate. That's what food and food stories are for. Until next time, bon appetit.